to the University 4.0 dialogue series organized by Agora and Academia. I am George Sipos, the editor of the University 4.0 newsletter and host of the University 4.0 video dialogues. The aim of University 4.0 is to create a virtual space for debate about the future of higher education and by extension of our society in general, as we see daily the advance of artificial intelligence, virtual and augmented reality environments, increased digitalization of industry, healthcare, public administration and government, to name just a few. And if they weren't clear before 2020, at least for some, the COVID-19 pandemic has made evident the crisis in so many areas of our society. We will meet here with leaders in education and not only, in domains that impact the transformation of our society. We will discuss the good and the bad, the challenges and the opportunities in an open debate format, and we invite all of you to join us with comments, opinions, and suggestions. After all, we are all in this together, and education has an enormous impact on our lives and the way we build our future. I am honored to be joined today by Pamela Barrett, an expert who needs little introduction to professionals in international education. Pamela Barrett is the CEO and director of Barton Carlyle, a specialist in international education management consultancy, working with universities, colleges, governments, and education providers worldwide on all aspects of the global education agenda. Pamela had a long and distinguished career in international education, both within higher education institutions in the UK and the USA, as well as positions in the British Council in Malaysia and the USA, and in the global Big Four management consulting and audited firms before she established Barton Carlyle in 2009. Her firm operates collaboratively with a team of associates who are some of the most experienced in the field. Pamela's own specialisms are in internationalization and international enrollment strategy, market insight, and strategic risk management. And it is in this last category that we want to engage Pamela's expertise today and to look at higher education and risk management in and post COVID-19 pandemic. So Pamela, welcome to University 4.0, and thank you for accepting our invitation today.
Thank you so much, George. It's great to be with you today.
Always a joy having Pamela with us and listening and learning from her expertise and wisdom. So I'll start with a question about risk management. Like we said, in risk management, I always valued your analysis and your statements and your commentaries about how certain markets can impact university efforts in student recruitment, in partnerships, and so on. And I remember you way before the pandemic warning universities about the need for risk management analysis prior to any endeavors abroad and so on and so forth. So were they listening at the time? Were the major players in international education prepared at all for what's happened with the pandemic?
George, that's a great question, but I don't want it to be a kind of "I told you so" moment. I've been really struggling over the past year to sort of think about what to write because I don't want to be the Cassandra voice of international education. Of course, I didn't predict the pandemic. I don't think anybody predicted this pandemic except a famous author who wrote a novel called 2020 in 1995, very prescient. But some of the best international organizations in the field have been warning about this type of problem for a number of years, not specifically a viral pandemic in terms of the pandemic that we've had, but certainly a worldwide event that's had significant impact on all fields of life and on economy and the major economies of the world. So no, I didn't predict it. What I was trying to do over the course of the years, as you will have observed, is talk to educational institutions about their preparedness for the stuff that goes horribly wrong. And I tried to talk about the importance of having a risk management strategy to be able to think about what you would do to prepare and how you would and how your institution would manage the impact of something disastrous like a sudden cease of the flow of international student mobility. So in that respect, I suppose it's an "I told you so" moment. But no, not everybody was listening. That's true.
Right. Well, thank you. Yeah, I I always like to think with your analysis when it comes to, I remember listening in to presentations of yours about China and political instability, and about a number of factors that can take place in international education. And I always felt from inside higher education and from the outside of it that we really paid not a lot of attention to that. We didn't quite think that was something we needed to work on. So I can't help but wonder now that this pandemic has happened and it's ongoing. I mean, we're not sure exactly when this is ending.
That's right.
Will this change at all the appetite for risk management analysis, for in international education? Will universities try to be more prepared than before?
I very much hope so, because risk management really is all about trying to imagine the future and trying to think about the scenarios that will have the worst possible impact, or any kind of impact really, on our ability to do the work that we do. So what I've tried to talk about over the years is an emphasis on kind of understanding markets. And what anything has taught us this pandemic is about, because of the unevenness of the pandemic, what we call the kind of the lumpy effects of the pandemic, there are countries in different situations with the pandemic that are recovering in different ways. I think one of the things that we'll find is that a longer term effect of the pandemic will be a fundamental change in the economic futures of countries in the world that will change the historical determinants of global student mobility, and will require us to have a much more detailed and better understanding of the fabric of global student mobility. And I think, therefore, that what's happening is that the institutions who are most prepared, who are most embedded, who are most engaged in key markets, are those that will do better, because what they're doing is they're understanding, they're being there, they have a presence, they have collaborations, they have engagements in countries, and they will work differently through and with the pandemic. Will it change the university's appetite for risk itself? I don't know, because universities always think of them. I'm sure you agree, George. Universities always think of themselves as pretty risk averse, but actually, because of the practice and some of the sort of wild behavior, they're some of the riskiest institutions that there are. So that risk appetite, that management of risk, is about understanding the appetite and the amount of risk that you're taking on, and not just being creative with the scenario planning, but really getting to grips with the management and the mitigation strategies. So what if it all goes horribly wrong? So what if our students supply? What have we got in place to leverage things? I think the big lesson out of this pandemic, I'm sorry, I'm rambling on now, but the big lesson here is about the kind of unpredictability of everything, and the lack of sure ground on which to plan. And those that had a risk management plan were about putting in place some practices. After 9/11, some of the most important organizations said that those who did the best, those who were able to get out of the buildings, I should say, those who were able to get through that remarkable and awful piece of our history were those who rehearsed, those who practiced. They also say this about airplane disasters. You pay attention to the safety briefing, you rehearse, you imagine yourself in that moment, and you know what to do, and you put in place some practices. Now, a lot of us have sort of felt for a long time that the risk management plan was just something that was sort of happening. People tick the boxes and put it in a drawer. But what we found from this pandemic is that actually being real about the potential for disaster, I sound like a real Eeyore, but being real about the potential of disaster is something that will save our institutions. And I think we're seeing that, alas, and sadly so, come true in these terrible days.
Right. And it's you're absolutely right. I mean, I think that you can rehearse, and you can prepare, and you can have it on paper, and sometimes things just don't go according to plan. living in Japan, I know for a fact that there is a lot of risk management, emergency
Oh,
preparedness,
with
and so on.
earthquakes and all of that kind of, yeah.
Everything. Right.
Yeah.
And then March 11 happens, and the Fukushima disaster takes place, and everybody's like at a loss. Well, what's going on? Why? How did this happen? And universities are closing as an after effect of that, and the entire city of Tokyo is closing, and so there's always this post factum insight, if you will,
Yes.
of what we could have done.
Yes.
But I think the pandemic has also taught us that a lot of the universities that are engaged out there in the field of international education, that have students out there, and so on and so forth, did not really have a good risk management scenario, and they panicked. A lot of universities panicked, and I've seen people rambling and screaming in the middle of the night, let's get the students out, let's get the students in, keep the students there, don't keep them there. Where do we take them? Do we bring them back from Japan? Do we bring them back from China? Where do things go? And nobody knew really what to do.
Yeah.
And in most cases, you ended up with like fingers being pointed, and there's the scapegoat, and so on and so forth.
I don't know, George. I mean, I do think that universities made the best possible choices with the right, with all of the information that they had available to hand. I think those that were the most successful, nobody predicted this particular emergency. Nobody could predict a particular sort of an emergency. But what they could do is establish the parameters of what potential fallouts there might be from a variety of emergencies and deal on that basis. And I think, and I think those that were those that kind of, I'm not going to say did the best, because there's no prizes right out of this for anybody, but I think those that were the most successful in their student size were those who put the student at the center of the response, in terms of the the thoughtfulness and the ways in which the educational institution kind of lived up to the core part of their vision and mission. And as I said before, those who had collaborations in other countries, those who were most connected on the ground, and those who paid attention to my seminars about market insight and and the importance of understanding and having market presence.
Right. Absolutely. Absolutely. And Pamela, this is kind of like a segue in what we were talking about a little bit earlier. I mean, you touched upon it a little bit, but I mean, I'm not asking you to predict anything. I don't think anybody can really predict anything right now. There is a tremendous appetite now for going back to what things were, and so on and so forth. But what do you think then the pandemic impact will be, in terms of universities moving forward? Will it be business as usual as soon as possible? Will it be, okay, we're all jumping back onto the airplanes and we're doing the things that we did before? Or would there be a little bit more consciousness moving towards like perhaps online methods of teaching, and then doing hybrid? I'm a big proponent of hybrid education. I think that it does best to just have different things in place, and not just be on the ground at all costs, and so on and so on. What do you think?
So I think there's something specific about the campus-based student experience that students are missing. And I think this generation of students that the World Economic Forum has called the pandemials are going to be approaching their higher education experience with a range of different experiences that they're coming from, and a certain sort of anxiety, but above all, different sorts of choices about how they go about it. And I think, so on the one hand, I would be thrilled if we could just get back on airplanes and go do what we did, because actually that produced really quite an interesting and engaging and fundamentally growth-oriented international education industry. I hate to call it an industry, but it is kind of an industry.
Yeah.
I did the air quote thing, I'm sorry.
Yep.
But I think it would behoove us all to take quite some time for reflection about what this means in our practice. So I'll deal with the international enrolment management, the international student recruitment side of the house. I mean, clearly a lot of institutions are fundamentally dependent on revenue streams from international students. I respect that. It's extremely important. But what it's taught us is the fragility of relying on those income streams. It's particularly taught us about the risk element of dependency on any one or two particular markets for students. The pandemic has also taught us that actually accessing future students, their parents, their influencers, their counsellors, is possible in a number of different sorts of ways that is not just standing across a table at an education fair. And I think I'm talking particularly to my American institution friends who have relied on those sort of recruitment fair types of techniques to really embrace the idea of engaging differently with students. A lot of new technologies have emerged, a lot of different ways of working with potential students and their influencers. It's also taught us a lot about how many of our institutions are reliant on agents and on market presence. Those of us who have, those institutions who have overseas offices, overseas campuses, have really an opportunity to think about how they leverage those elements of presence to engage with students. I think, will it change things in the future? I think everything will get more competitive, but that's a theme that's been going for a while. There'll be more institutions, I think, chasing students who are indeed looking for an overseas experience. But we need to understand that international students have much more choice than they have had before, and they're looking at those choices with different lenses. My own prediction, for what it's worth, is that affordability is the next big thing, and that those institutions who can't approach international students with a variety of approaches to price, to scholarships, to creative and interesting way of delivering that respects the students' individual situations are going to struggle. And also affordability is about providing students with a return on investment. So this is the career focused, the outcome focused education that students are looking for. Respecting also that there might be opportunities for creative collaborations with overseas institutions that we might not have thought of before. So we don't necessarily have to capture an 18-year-old international students from an international high school and bring them to our campuses for 3 or 4 years. And that's the only form of international student experience. The world is fragmenting, and we better start getting smart about what that might look like.
You told us a little bit about this and we covered, but I always like to think long term. What if we were to do an exercise of imagination and think higher education, international education overall will be like this in the next decade, for instance? Can you venture anything in that direction? Is it just too preposterous to think about?
It's kind of, what does the future look like?
Yeah, right.
So so what I do know is that another pandemic is coming. I do know that sustainable development is a significant issue. I do know that another pandemic is forecast, and I do know that the consequences of the way the world operates and the way that world works and the way that we live our lives in connection with nature has consequences, and that's where this pandemic has come from, and we ignore that at our peril. Now, international education is a function of globalization. The clock isn't turning back and globalization is going forward, but we better, I think, understand the interdependencies of our lives and our relationships between and across countries and time zones and regimes, and understand what our role is as international educators. Our role as international educators has got to be to facilitate the fundamentally transformational experience that is international education, and start attending to the way in which it's accessed and delivered and afforded and respected going forward. Because I think it's from the work that we do that solutions to some of the world's greatest problems will come. So we gotta get through this lump. We've got to get through this COVID craziness and deliver on the other side. I think it's our obligation to the world to do that. So let's get our big boy smart pants on and really get moving.
Wonderful. Brilliant. This is a great note for us to end this brief conversation. There's always a lot more to talk with you about international education in general and strategic thinking and moving
Oh, and
forward.
George, if I may say one more thing,
Please,
and
please.
that is get a risk management strategy in place, for goodness sake.
Yes,
The next
absolutely.
thing that you do.
I would advise anyone, any higher education institution to do that. You need that. You need to have a good a strategist for risk management there, a person who's able to analyze your markets, to tell you, to give you market briefs, to let you know before you enter any market, before you enter any partnership, if this is the right match for you. If this is the right place for you to be. If you, such and such university in the US or Canada, as a small school or medium-sized school, are fit for a market like Vietnam, for instance. I mean, all these things, you know, these are things that are left to people with little to no experience in most cases, because universities really want to get out there, but it's not sufficient. So I completely agree with you. Yes, we need to put that out there. Thank you very much, Pamela. I appreciate your time today, and I hope our viewers will enjoy your wisdom and your predictions and your knowledge. And once again, for everybody, Pamela can be contacted through the Barton Carlyle contact information that we'll put at the end of our small dialogue today. Thank you very much.
Thanks very much, George.